Have you ever wondered why so many people, even after achieving everything society defines as success, a respectable career, a stable relationship, financial security, and social recognition, still feel deeply empty inside? Why, upon reaching the top of the ladder, do some look around and ask, is this all there is? This type of silent discomfort, almost impossible to explain, was identified by Carl Gustav Jung as an alarming psychic condition he called Sunday neurosis. An emptiness that does not arise from lack, but from achievement. It is what he observed in many of his patients. Individuals who, upon attaining what everyone would consider an enviable life, began to experience a disturbing sense of disconnection as if they were living someone else's life. The entire week was filled with obligations, goals, and external expectations. But in the silence of Sunday, when there are no emails, meetings, or distractions, something deeper begins to emerge. An existential malaise that cannot be resolved with more work, more shopping, or more likes. Jung saw that this phenomenon was not a character flaw, nor ingratitude, nor simply biochemical depression. It was the soul protesting. A cry from the depths of the unconscious saying, "You have built a life that everyone admires, except for who you really are." This is the golden prison, beautiful on the outside, but suffocating on the inside. In this introduction, we delve into a truth that few dare to face. Success, when built solely on external demands and social persona, can become a sentence of emptiness. And worse, this often happens to people who did everything right. They followed society's manual to the letter, but they forgot to consult the only guide that truly matters, their own soul. Throughout this video, we will explore why this emptiness occurs, how Jung explained this internal rupture, and most importantly, what can be done when even a perfect life seems to have no meaning at all. Because perhaps the problem is not what you have achieved, but who you had to become to achieve all of this. If you have ever felt this way, if this silent feeling of disconnection has visited you in moments of apparent tranquility, keep watching. This video was made just for you. For most of life, society offers us a clear script. Study, choose a promising career, achieve stability, start a family, seek recognition, and ascend socially. We are taught, both explicitly and implicitly, that these milestones are synonymous with fulfillment. Many follow this path with admirable discipline and effort. However, something deeply unsettling happens to some of these people when they finally arrive. The promise of wholeness never materializes. Success, that ideal pursued for years, reveals itself to be an illusion. Shiny on the outside, but hollow on the inside. Carl Jung observed this repeatedly in his clinical practice. He realized that this frustration was not a coincidence, but a predictable consequence of a structural error in how we build our lives, relying almost exclusively on external expectations. This error has a name and form. Jung called it identification with the persona, the social mask we create to be accepted, admired, and rewarded. The persona is functional and necessary, but it becomes dangerous when we start to believe that it is all we are. The problem is that the more we invest in this persona, in the role of exemplary professional, ideal partner, proud child, productive citizen, the less space there is for the self, the deepest, most authentic and instinctive part of the psyche. And the self, when neglected, does not disappear. It retreats to the unconscious and begins to manifest in subtle ways. Anxiety without apparent cause, apathy, loss of meaning, a desire to escape even when everything seems fine. Jung warned that the human soul cannot tolerate living in dissonance for too long. If you build your identity solely on what is socially validated, without ever looking at your true internal needs, you are inevitably distancing yourself from yourself. The price? An emptiness that no external achievement can fill. And this emptiness is precisely what many successful people face. Lonely in mansions, disconnected in perfect marriages, suffocated in prestigious positions. This disconnection does not happen overnight. It is the result of a life built without listening to one's own soul. As Jung wrote, what you do not bring to consciousness appears in your life as fate. The fate, in this case, is the silent frustration of a life that, although admired by all, feels strange inside. As if something is deeply wrong but no one else can see it. Only you. And when this crisis finally knocks at the door, it is no use doubling down. It is no use seeking a bigger promotion, a more expensive car, or a new relationship. Because the problem is not outside, it is within. And it is precisely at this point that many face the decisive moment that Jung called the turning point of life. In the next part, we will dive into this powerful and liberating concept, the moment when the psyche begins to demand a radical change, a deep calling to stop living as others expect of you and start living as who you truly are. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. There is a moment in the journey of every human being that, although not marked on the calendar, has the power to redefine all existence. Carl Jung called this moment Die Wendezeit, the turning point of life. It is not a specific event, but a deep psychic demand, an inner call for us to stop living according to imposed ideals and start living according to who we really are. This turning point usually occurs around the ages of 35 to 45, although it can arise earlier or later, depending on each individual's journey. And contrary to what many think, it is not triggered by failure, but precisely by success. Until this phase, most people are completely engaged in the pursuit of external goals, career, stability, approval, achievement. This movement is natural. It is necessary to consolidate the ego, build social identity, establish oneself in the world. But Jung observed that the human psyche was made for more than that. And when this first stage is completed, the soul begins to demand something different: depth, meaning, integration. That is why, after achieving everything that should bring happiness, many find themselves facing a disconcerting feeling. I have everything, but I still feel incomplete. This is not a failure. This is the sign that the turning point has arrived. The soul, suffocated under years of conditioning, begins to emerge. And it is not satisfied with more achievements. It demands truth. Jung was direct in stating that if we ignore this call, life begins to deteriorate in subtle ways: sabotaged decisions, growing apathy, psychosomatic symptoms, crises in relationships, a chronic restlessness that finds no logical explanation. The turning point of life is, therefore, a crossroads. Some resist, doubling down on the path they were already on, trying to fill the void with more of the same. But this only deepens the emptiness. Others listen, even if with fear, and begin to ask themselves, what if everything I built is not really mine? This question, as terrifying as it may seem, is also the door to freedom. Jung argued that this change is not only desirable, it is inevitable. Denying it risks spiritual illness. Accepting it, on the other hand, requires courage, because it means questioning everything: your choices, your relationships, your beliefs, your identity. It means facing the fact that, to truly live, it may be necessary to deconstruct much of what has been built. But why does this feeling of estrangement from one's own life intensify at this point? What exactly is being betrayed within us when we ignore this call? The answer, according to Jung, lies in the hidden dynamic between the persona and the self. And this is what we will explore deeply in the next part. How identification with the social mask can imprison the soul, and why this leads us to internal collapse, even when everything seems perfect on the outside. If you feel that you are living a life that is not truly yours, the origin of that feeling can be found in one of the deepest concepts of Jungian psychology, the conflict between the persona and the self. To understand the emptiness that haunts so many successful people, it is necessary to comprehend this silent war that occurs within the psyche, a war between the image we present to the world and what we truly are at our core. The persona, in Jung's view, is the social mask that we all develop to survive and function in society. It is built from childhood based on the expectations of parents, school, culture, and collective norms. It is the edited version of ourselves, educated, efficient, controlled, adapted. The persona is necessary. Without it, we could not operate in the social world. However, the problem arises when we identify so deeply with this mask that we completely forget who is behind it. The self, on the other hand, is the authentic core of the psyche, the organizing center that contains our deepest potential, our true desires, our unique individuality. While the persona seeks external acceptance, the self seeks internal fulfillment. And when these two forces come into conflict, when the persona dominates life and the self is neglected, emptiness is born. Imagine someone who, over decades, has built an admirable career. They are respected, admired, even envied. But to achieve this, they had to repress their sensitivity, stifle their creativity, ignore their need for introspection. They became what the world valued, but set aside what their soul truly craved. Over time, this repression takes a toll. The person wakes up one day and no longer recognizes themselves. They feel like a stranger within their own routine. Success begins to feel like a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but suffocating on the inside. This is the cost of a life lived out of balance with the self, and it manifests in various ways. Existential crises with no apparent cause, feelings of alienation, a deep boredom that even the greatest pleasures cannot dissipate. As Jung stated, the persona is what someone is not, but what they and others think they are. The further you stray from the self, the more you live for others' expectations, and the more you betray yourself, the duller life becomes. But the self is not passive. It manifests in dreams, in symptoms, in internal conflicts, in emotional relapses. It tries, at all costs, to get your attention, and it does so not to punish, but to remind. You were not born to play a role. You were born to be whole. Reconnecting with the self, however, requires more than reflection. It demands concrete action, rethinking choices, breaking patterns, challenging the idealized image we have created of ourselves. And this inevitably provokes consequences. Relationships change, plans crumble, identities collapse. But it is in this collapse that something true can finally emerge. In the next part, we will delve deeper into the signs of this disconnection. What are the symptoms that indicate the soul is being ignored? How do the body and mind begin to scream when the self is suffocated by the persona? And why can the collapse, although painful, be the beginning of true liberation? When external life seems to be in order, but internally everything feels out of place, the body and mind begin to emit signals. These are silent alerts that something is being ignored, not something superficial, but essential. Jung understood that psychic suffering is not a mistake to be eliminated, but a symbolic language of the soul. And when the soul is silenced for too long, it finds other ways to manifest. Anxiety without reason, a sense of emotional numbness, chronic insomnia, sudden existential crises, and even physical illnesses without clear medical explanation. These symptoms are not the problem. They are the message. It is common for a person at this stage not to understand what is happening. After all, everything seems fine. They have stability, a good relationship, a social circle, even moments of leisure. Yet there is still a persistent discomfort, a kind of diffuse unease, as if living on autopilot. Nothing seems wrong, but nothing seems right. Waking up becomes an effort, working a mechanical obligation, and in the rare moments of rest, silence becomes unbearable. This is the direct consequence of a life built from the persona, while the self remains suffocated. The individual begins to feel like an actor who knows the script but has forgotten why they accepted the role. And no matter how hard they try, the emptiness does not dissipate, because it is not in the external world, but in the internal disconnection. Symptoms such as chronic procrastination, recurring discouragement, irritability without apparent cause, and a profound loss of enthusiasm for life are reflections of this split. In many cases, the soul resorts to dreams to try to communicate. Symbolic dreams, often chaotic or disturbing, reveal the unconscious's attempt to restore psychic balance. As Jung wrote in The Modern Man in Search of a Soul, the dream represents the inner truth of the dreamer, even when their consciousness is not yet ready to understand it. Furthermore, there is the phenomenon of self-sabotage. The individual begins to sabotage their own achievements, whether in work, relationships, or health. Unconsciously, they try to destroy the structure they have created, not out of masochism, but because that structure has become a prison. It is the soul trying to break the walls of the persona. Another common symptom is compulsion, overworking, excessive consumption, seeking constant distractions, all to avoid confronting the emptiness. But what is being avoided is, in fact, the confrontation with the self, the one that was abandoned for the persona to shine. These signs are not failures, they are invitations. Each crisis, each episode of burnout, each feeling of not belonging to my own life, is an opportunity to return to authenticity. But to accept it, one must stop fighting against the emptiness and start listening to it. In the next part, we will explore what it truly means to heal this emptiness, because it does not disappear with more achievements or forced positivity. According to Jung, the only real way out is the turn inward, a deep, uncomfortable, and often radical process, but absolutely necessary for life to regain its soul. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Most people, when confronted with internal emptiness, immediately seek an external solution. They change cities, partners, careers. They buy things, enroll in courses, dive into activities. They try to fill the void with experiences, consumption, or even superficial spirituality. But as Carl Jung warned, the existential void that arises after exclusive identification with the persona is not a problem that can be solved within the same life structure that caused it. It is not a mistake in the system. It is the bankruptcy of the system. True healing, according to Jung, requires a movement that few people are willing to make, the turn inward. This means reversing the direction of attention, stopping to ask, what does the world expect from me? And starting to ask, what is my soul asking of me? This movement is radical because it challenges everything we have been conditioned to value. It requires silence, introspection, facing the shadow, and a willingness to confront the most forgotten and painful parts of oneself. It is not about cheap self-help. Jung was clear. This process is destructive before it is constructive. It involves letting go of carefully cultivated identities, disappointing people who admired you for what you represented, not for who you really are. It is like dismantling a house that took decades to build, but was erected on the wrong ground. The turn inward may include drastic changes, abandoning a career that no longer makes sense, ending a relationship where you cannot be whole, changing habits, cutting ties, revisiting traumas, questioning beliefs. But above all, it requires brutal honesty with oneself. It means stopping the negotiation with your own internal silence and finally facing the pain of living a life that is not yours. This journey back to the self is called by Jung the process of individuation, the path of integrating all parts of the psyche, where the ego ceases to be the center and the self begins to guide life. On this path, a person starts to hear their true impulses, recognize their hidden desires, accept their contradictions, and transform their sufferings into awareness. It is a slow, painful process, but deeply liberating. And this transformation does not happen in a weekend retreat or a simple epiphany. It happens in the small daily choices, saying no when everyone expects a yes, admitting feelings you have learned to suppress, changing the pace of life, rediscovering passions that were buried in the name of productivity or image. The turn inward is, above all, an act of courage, because it requires relinquishing the version of yourself that the world has learned to applaud. And in this abandonment, something new begins to emerge, a meaningful life, an existence with soul, a presence that no longer needs external validation to justify itself. But even after starting this journey, there is one last obstacle to face: the illusion that it is still possible to keep everything as it is while simultaneously living authentically. In the next and final part, we will talk about the truth that few have the courage to accept, that healing the void requires sacrifices, and that rebuilding a life around the self may mean abandoning everything that once brought you success. There comes a moment when it is no longer possible to sustain the illusion. You realize that you cannot continue living the same way and expect to feel something different. The soul, when silenced for too long, begins to scream, and this scream manifests as chronic dissatisfaction, emotional collapses, existential crises, and a constant feeling of being out of place. Carl Jung was clear: this type of suffering is not a defect to be corrected. It is a call to transformation. And answering this call inevitably means sacrificing parts of life that were built to please others, but that betray who you really are. This is the hardest point of the journey, accepting that some things will need to die for others to be born. It could be the dream job that was never yours. It could be a relationship that works on paper but does not nurture your essence. It could be the social role you learned to play so well, but that today empties you. None of this needs to be thrown away with anger or impulsivity, but all of it needs to be re-evaluated with honesty, brutal, courageous, non-negotiable. Jung believed that only those who have the courage to traverse the underworld of their own psyche, face the shadow, recognize the rejected desires, and come out the other side with a new direction in life, become truly whole. True freedom is not in having a perfect life in the eyes of others. It is in building a life that makes sense to you, even if no one understands, even if it costs approval, stability, or status. This reconstruction is profound. It does not happen in a day, but it begins with a simple gesture: stopping. Stopping fleeing from the void. Stopping trying to fill it with distractions. Stopping pretending that everything is fine when the soul is begging for change. And in that silence, something begins to reorganize. A new internal axis emerges, and for the first time you start to remember who you are, not what others expect of you, but your rawest and most alive essence. This is the journey back to the self, and there is no greater achievement, because a life guided by the soul is, by definition, a true life. It may not be perfect, it may not be understood, but it is yours, and that is enough. Now tell me, Do you feel you are living according to who you really are? Or are you playing a role that was written by others? Leave your comment. Your story may resonate with someone who also needs to hear this. And if this video spoke to you in any way, don't stop here. The next video is also essential. Keep watching, because the journey does not end with awakening. It only begins.